I came in and he was strong. He said, "You have forgotten again." And I remember I took it seriously, but I took it lightly. I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, Prabhupada. I'll go do it." And my take on it is that he saw that I wasn't really ready for some heavy chastisement. So for months and months and months after that, I never got chastised for anything else. And I always remembered to wipe the spot.
That's probably why.
I remember one morning early on, he said, "Can you make halava?" And I hadn't had much Vedic cooking experience. I was a cook by nature, but hadn't done much before I'd done this work. And so I said, "I really don't know the recipe, but I'll call the temple and find out what the recipe is." And so I called the temple, couldn't find anyone who knew what the recipe was. I knew what the ingredients were, but the amounts I didn't know. So coming from a healthy, hippie kind of background, one of the reasons I didn't join the temple was I didn't want to give up raw diet. And I remember my first donation to the temple, my first service, was a 50-pound can of honey, because I felt like we shouldn't be eating sugar. So I speculated, and I made halava with honey. And if anyone knows, you end up with something you could play baseball with. So I remember I made this preparation, I put it in the bowl, and I took it in with his breakfast, and he didn't touch it. There was one small dent out of the corner where he was able to get his spoon into it a little bit. And he was very kind, he didn't say anything to me about it. Later on, Kartikeya Swami made halava that came out fluffy and light, and Prabhupada ate 2 or 3 servings. He said, "This is halava. Find out the recipe." So I did. And just for the record, 2½ water, 1 farina, 1 butter, and 1 1/3 sugar. And the extra water, it was more than what the recipe book called for, but it made it very light. So I've always made halava with that recipe since. Never honey again. The main thing was cleanliness and punctuality. As a matter of fact, he reiterated that over and over, that is the prime prerequisite for a cook or a pujari, is cleanliness and punctuality. Even later on, I remember once in India, we were traveling, Jamuna and Guru Das and the original group of devotees that went to India. We would go to villages. We would stay in wealthy people's homes, and then we would go out for engagements in villages. And once we went to a village, and they took us to the local Krishna temple, and it was just a little small hole-in-the-wall kind of a place. And the altar was very dirty. The pujari was wild. He had his front teeth missing, and he would offer very quickly and then turn around and throw the water in our faces. And the main thing was the cleanliness. I saw that it was just very unkempt. So as we were leaving, I asked Prabhupada in the car, I said, "Srila Prabhupada, I have a question about this temple." He said, "Ask me later." So later, when there was no one else there, he said, "What is your question about the temple?" And I said, "Well, you've taught us that cleanliness is essential in deity worship. And this temple was very dirty. And I just wondered, is Krishna really there?" And he said, "Yes, Krishna is there." He said, "Our standard is cleanliness. You keep that standard. Don't judge anyone else by what they do." And he, several times during the time I was with him, he either said to me or I heard him say, "All the rules and regulations are meant for us to apply on ourselves alone, not to judge anybody else." He said, "I saw that pujari." He said he was very different, but his heart was for Krishna, and therefore that's what we see. Well, it's embarrassing to say this in front of all the assembled Vaishnavas, but Prabhupada did tell me one time that I was the king of fault finders. Because he would give me a teaching, and my deepest internal intent was to share it. And somehow, because of my ego, when I would share it, it would sound like fault finding, and there was some of that there. So one of his instructions to me was to give that up, to really take all the instructions and apply them right here and not worry what anybody else is doing. I remember one morning, it was a chilly morning in Los Angeles, and Prabhupada would wear his kurta, and then he had 2 chadors put together that he would wear. And one morning I was a little late in getting the car ready, and I ran out and all I had was a kurta on. So we were walking in Cheviot Hills Park, and I would always walk a couple steps behind him. So I was walking, I was cold, you know, but I was walking along, and Prabhupada turned around, and so, just like a brother, he said, "You're cold. Here, take one of these." And he took off his chadors and pulled them apart. I said, "No, no, Prabhupada, I'm okay." He said, "No, no, you're cold. Wear this." And I, again, you know, I said, "Prabhupada, these are your chadors." He said, "No, wear it. You're cold." So I took his chador and wore it for the rest of the walk. So kind, you know. My feeling was so much awe and reverence, and he accepted that because that's Lord Chaitanya's instruction, is to be the guru, and that, you know, that's how he can assist me to develop love for Krishna. And his heart was just so much there and present. When I was with Prabhupada in Los Angeles, I would drive him on the morning walk, just he and I, every morning. And one morning he would go to Venice Beach and walk at the beach. One morning he would go to Cheviot Hills Park and walk in the park. And one morning he would go to a very wealthy part of Beverly Hills and walk in the very expensive homes around a big block. So there was this one house with a large plate glass window in the front, and they had a giant German Shepherd who would always come biting at the window. So one morning as we passed, they let the dog out the front door. And he came charging across the lawn. I'm speculating they had a collar on him that had a perimeter, because he came up to the edge of the grass but didn't come onto the sidewalk. I didn't know that. And I remember my thought is, I'm going to be seriously injured or die here, and it's in Prabhupada's service, and that's okay. So the dog was running across the lawn, Prabhupada was walking with his cane, and the dog came up to the edge, so I turned around to face the dog and stay in between the dog and Prabhupada. And he was barking and snarling at me. And I was there for a few seconds, and I glanced over my shoulder, and Prabhupada had very nonchalantly just kept walking, hadn't hardly paid any attention to what was going on. And so the dog was stopped, still barking, but he was stopped. So I turned around and ran to catch up to Prabhupada, and the dog trailed me along the edge of the grass. And as I caught up to Prabhupada, he turned around and took a wide stance, like a martial arts stance, lifted his cane over his head, and said, "Hut!" And the dog's tail went between his legs. He immediately turned and ran back to the house. And I was amazed. I was amazed and not amazed also. But Prabhupada said, if you take a stick to an animal and give them a hut, they will generally, you don't have to hit them, but they will generally get the message and go on. So years later we were in India, we were in Jaipur, staying at the palace of the king of Jaipur. And in Jaipur they have, I think they're called langurs, big monkeys, Hanuman monkeys, with the real long tail. And the place that Prabhupada's quarters were was around the base of a big bathing ghat. We could see the palace across, and there was this walled bathing ghat that had been built. The ghat was in the roof. And it was a circular part. Prabhupada had a room, and then there was a covered veranda, and a small room that had been his kitchen, was his kitchen. And a monkey had torn the door off the kitchen and eaten all the boga. So they had replaced the door, and I was in Prabhupada's room within a day or so after that happening, and we always kept a stick by the door. So the room was filled with Indian guests and devotees. And we heard this rattling sound. So I looked out the door and there was a monkey trying to take the door off this room. So I picked up the stick and went outside, and I remembered the dog. I remembered what Prabhupada had told me. So I was about 10 feet away, and he was bent over and down. So as I came up, he heard me and turned around and stood up, and I went, "Hut!" And he looked at me and puffed his chest up, and bared his teeth and started walking towards me. And he was almost as tall as I was. And I turned around and ran back into Prabhupada's room. It was so strange, the human-like face. It was very strange. And I went back in Prabhupada's room and opened the door and came in real quick, and he knew exactly, and so did everyone else, what had happened. And he just broke out laughing. He laughed. He said, "You did not know the process." He said, "If you had gone to him one more time," he was testing you, "if you had just one more time said hut, he would have stopped." So I got my second lesson on animal training from Prabhupada. I remember also walking on the beach. One day he was walking along and a wave that was particularly big broke and came up, and he had to jump and dance out of the way. And I said, "Srila Prabhupada, even the ocean wants to touch your lotus feet." And he laughed, and I don't remember his exact words, but it was very, very humble. He took that glory that had been given to him and turned it to Krishna. I saw him do that so many times, so many times. A couple of times in the temple in Los Angeles. Once on his birthday, he came in from his morning walk and walked in, paid his obeisances to the deities, and went and sat on the Vyasasan, and one by one the devotees spoke about the glories of Prabhupada. And of course everyone was speaking how he had saved their lives and how he was saving the world by bringing Krishna consciousness. And he just listened, he accepted with his eyes closed. He was just listening. And then when the last person had spoken and Prabhupada was going to speak, there was a very long silence. He was very quiet for a long time. And you could have heard a pin drop. And you could see the ecstatic symptoms in his body that he was not allowing to fully manifest. But there was some tears coming and he was shivering. And he said, "I thank you," when he finally spoke, he said, "I thank you all so much for your praise and how much you show your love for me." He said, "But truly I have to say that I am just the servant of my beloved Guru Maharaj, and all this is happening by his grace. I am simply his servant, and I'm trying to do what he asked me to do. And it is his grace that is allowing this to happen." And then he stopped, and there was more tears. And then he said, "And actually, all of you are my gurus." He said, "My Guru Maharaj has given me this service to do, and I came here with very little, and it is because of you that this is going on. So I offer you my respects as my gurus." When we were traveling in India, at one point we went to Surat, and we were guests in the home of an elder banker gentleman named Bhagubai Jariwala. And we had been challenged by being always fed very opulent prasadam, which then translated into dysentery for most of us. And so we were at this man's home, and they were very adamant about seconds and thirds and really serving us nicely. And most everyone was sick. We were there for a while, a couple of weeks, and not being trained in the Vedic system from birth, we weren't quite up to standard. We didn't, many of us were ill, and the cleanliness standard was not very high in our little ashram in his house. And there were many things that he could have found fault with. Sometimes an occasional devotee would be rude, Or I remember sometimes people calling for more prasadam. Hey, bring me more. And so when we left his home, on the last day, he came and he gave each devotee an envelope with 51 rupees in it, and which was big for us at that time. That, that was something no one had ever done. And then he spoke, and he was a little man, small body, thin, beautiful. He was in his 70s, had beautiful, clear eyes, and just this loving countenance. And he spoke, and he said, I am so honored that you have all been here at my home. It has been such an honor to serve you. He said, and I really hope, and he started crying. He said, I really hope that you can forgive me for all the offenses I've committed against you. And then he sobbed. And Prabhupada looked over at us, and his eyes opened up, and he said, this is an example of a Vaishnava. He said, this is the quality of a Vaishnava. Once, when Prabhupada was in London, I was outside the temple, and there was a nun, an elder nun, walking by on the street with her garb. She was a Carmelite, which I believe the Carmelites are vegetarians. And I said, Hare Krishna, and she said, Hare Krishna. She was an elder woman. And she stopped to talk to me. And we talked for a minute, and I said, our spiritual master is here. Would you like to meet him? And she said, I'd be honored to. So I brought her in the temple, and I went in Prabhupada's room, and I said, Prabhupada, there's a Christian nun here who I was speaking to, and she's anxious to meet you. He said, oh, bring her in. So she came in, and as I came back in with her, I paid my obeisances. She paid her obeisances. She bowed down, put her head on the floor. And Prabhupada looked up, and he was beaming. And they sat and talked for 10 or 15 minutes about Christianity and Krishna consciousness in total agreement, total accord. He would say something about our philosophy. She would say, yes, Prabhupada. And Jesus said, and Prabhupada would say, yes, and Krishna said. So for 10 minutes, this dialogue of interfaith went on. And she then said, Prabhupada, I'm so grateful to have met you. I really appreciate this connection, and I don't want to take any more of your time. I know you have a lot to do, so may I take my leave? And he said, yes, thank you very much. And then he looked to me and he said, give her this garland. He had his garland on the desk. So I walked over, and she paid her obeisances again. And as she was coming up, I gave her the garland. And it was so beautiful to see the interchange. Many times I saw Prabhupada do that with people of other faiths. He could always see the heart of a person, and would find that way to see the similarities. And if he saw in the heart of a person that they hadn't really gotten it yet, of whatever faith they were in, sometimes he would be a little strong with them. But if someone was sincere, he was always finding that way to see the similarities rather than any differences. And I remember in London at the same time, Prabhupada's room was on the second floor, I believe, of the temple in Bury Place, second or third floor. And just off of his rooms was the secretary's office. It was almost like a closet, a long closet. Shamashundar was his secretary at that time. And one day I was doing some typing. Sometimes Prabhupada would let me do some minor secretarial stuff. And I was typing, and this head popped in the door and said, hello, Shamshunda there? In an English accent. And I looked over and I said, no, he's not here now. And I looked back, I went typing, and then I did a double take because it was George Harrison. And I recognized him. And I said, he's not here, but Prabhupada's here, and I'm sure he'd like to see you. And he said, oh, I don't want to bother him. I said, I don't think it'd be a bother. And so I went in the room and I said, Prabhupada, George Harrison is here. And he said, oh, send him in. So I went out, and he was waiting outside, and I said, he wants to see you. And started taking his shoes or socks off, something, and he said, I get so nervous when I go to see Prabhupada. He said, actually, I just got my hair cut to see him. He had had long hair and a beard, and he had cut it short. And so he went in and closed the door. And I stayed outside for a couple of seconds and was just too curious. So I opened the door, and George was dandabat, flat on the floor, saying the prayers in Sanskrit. And so I went in and paid my obeisances, and he sat back by the door. And Prabhupada's desk was on the other side of the room, and he said, no, come closer, come closer. So George kind of inched his way forward, very humble, very humble. And Prabhupada said, no, no, not there, here. And he patted behind his desk. So George came around behind the desk, and Prabhupada, as soon as he was within reach, he reached out and grabbed him and pulled him in and hugged him, put his head on his chest and was messing his hair up. He said, it is so good to see you, so good to see you. How is your wife, Patty? George said, very good, Prabhupada. So they spoke, and George actually asked him, he said, Prabhupada, I've been thinking whether or not I should join the temple or shave my head and actually take up full practice. Prabhupada said, no, no, no. He said, you have a great gift. You have a place in the world where you can spread Krishna consciousness in a big way. He said, rather you stay where you are and adapt Krishna consciousness into your music. He said, I will teach you some of the songs. So George, and next day he came and brought Ravi Shankar. And for a week they would come. George came every day, Ravi Shankar came 2 or 3 times. And Prabhupada would get out Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's songbook and go through it with George and find songs and give him essences, give him some of the essences to use in his music. And it was such a loving exchange. It was really a beautiful thing to see. There were 2 times where Prabhupada and Yogi Bhajan met together. And Prabhupada was very strong about the purity of Krishna conscious philosophy and very much aware of the loopholes in many of the philosophies that were preached by Indian gurus. But with Yogi Bhajan, there was a real brotherhood. When Yogiji would come to see Prabhupada, they would laugh, they would tell jokes, they talked about the upcoming world situation. Yogi Bhajan was very heavy about it. He said, Prabhupada, the streets, my vision is the streets of the major cities of America will be rivers of blood. And Prabhupada said, yes, there is a lot coming. And then Prabhupada said to him on one occasion, you Sikhs have always protected us Vaishnavas. He said, we are the Brahmins, you are the Kshatriyas. You are the ones that came to Vrindavan and saved the temples and saved the devotees. And similarly, when this world situation increases, our movements will join together. And it was a very nice seeing of acceptance by seeing the spirit of a person, acceptance of someone of another, apparently another faith. One thing that comes to mind is there was a time when Prabhupada was having some physical challenges. And I had come from a sort of a health food background. And there was a doctor in India that also said, no, Prabhupada should eat raw food. I thought, yes, yes, this is good. This is good. I can do that. I can make raw food preparations. And so I told Prabhupada that. I said, this person has suggested eating a very light diet, no ghee. And he said, well, I can do this. I will do this. So I thought, oh, this is going to be really good. This, his health will become strong. And I prepared one meal like that, and he ate. He said, this was very good. And the next morning, morning prasad was almost always just fruit, simple things. And so I said, what would you like for lunch? And he said, dal, rice, chapatis, halava. And I asked him about the raw diet. He said, since I was a child, I have always loved prasadam, and I'm not going to give it up now. He said, Krishna will protect me. I will eat prasadam and Krishna will protect me. Then, along those lines, there was a time when I was feeling a little bit challenged in my body. I was feeling that ghee and sugar and some of the general fare was too heavy. I would tend to sleep or I would get sick. And when I ate very light food, I would be healthy. And devotees told me, that's Maya, that if you take prasadam, Krishna will bless you. Whatever you get is just a tiny fragment of your karma. So devotees just eat prasadam and they don't worry about health food stuff. So that makes sense. That's philosophically sound. But still, the practical day-to-day stuff was, if I ate a light diet, I served a lot better. That was a lot clearer. So I asked Prabhupada, remembering what he had said for himself. And I said, Srila Prabhupada, when I eat light, it's easier. When I eat heavy, it's heavier. And I understand the principle of just taking prasadam and accepting Krishna's mercy. What should I do? And I was fully ready to do whatever he told me to do. And he said, you should just take prasadam if you're Rupa Goswami. He said, but if you're a neophyte, which all of you are, you have to decide what is good for your devotional service and what is not good for your devotional service. Then I asked him, I said, well, how, if I'm feeling sick and I need to eat something other than what's offered to the deities, how do I offer it? How do I feel like I'm taking prasadam? And he said, if you need to prepare something simpler than what's being prepared for the deities, you prepare it at the same time, you set it aside in a place, it doesn't go on the altar, but it's set aside, and after the offering is over, it's also offered. He said, but you can't make better than Krishna. He said, if you have to take simple, you can do it that way, but you can't make opulent without offering. When we were in Bombay, we were staying in a place called Chembur. It was kind of out on the suburbs of Bombay. And it was in that initial time when there was the original group of devotees. And it was very sweet. We would all go in Prabhupada's room every morning and in the evening also, and it was just dialogue. It was very confidential and open. So the whole mood was really nice. One afternoon, I made paneer, fresh paneer, without pressing it. And I offered it with his fruit offering at 4 o'clock. I put a little honey on top and a little cinnamon or something. And I took it in and he ate about half the bowl. And he didn't comment, but I saw that he had eaten quite a bit, so I thought, I found something that Prabhupada likes. So the next day I made it again. And I took it in, and when I came to get his tray, there was 1 bite gone. So I thought, well, maybe he's not in the mood for it today. So a 3rd day, I made it again. And when I came in to get his plate, he hadn't touched it. And he said, the paneer is very nice, very tasty. But he said, as brahmacharis, he said, we can only eat paneer once a week. He said, otherwise, sex desire. He moved his hand. So that was the paneer instruction. Kartikeya Swami's
Hare Krishna. So now I would share the PPT about the introduction of Nanda Kumar Prabhu. So about Nanda Kumar Prabhu, he is a very early disciple. He was the personal servant of Srila Prabhupada, a dedicated devotee, and a life full of service to Srila Prabhupada. So there is some issues sharing the screen. I'm trying once again. Yes, better now. So about the introduction, he was among the early disciples of Srila Prabhupada, and he was known for his close personal service to Srila Prabhupada And as we heard from the lecture, he is recognized for his sincerity, simplicity, and dedication, and a very cherished figure in ISKCON's early history. So I was going through the details. So he actually comes in contact with the Hare Krishna movement during its pioneering phase between the late 1960s to early 1970s. And he got personal association and initiation from Srila Prabhupada, becoming part of ISKCON's first generation disciples, and he had a very lot number of incidents with Srila Prabhupada. Actually, what I had been hearing this lecture about Srila Prabhupada teaching his disciple of, chasing away the dogs and chasing away the monkey, but I wasn't very sure about him being the part of that pastime. So I just now got to know while hearing this lecture about his services in 1970, like about the early life and spiritual search. Like many early devotees, he sought spiritual depth and purpose. He was inspired by the growing bhakti movement in the West. He was drawn by Prabhupada's purity and powerful message, accepted the path of devotional service with full conviction. So, initial in the days, he was actively participating in direct instructions of Srila Prabhupada and various phases, and he had absorbed. He was known for his major qualities for which he was known was simplicity and seriousness in spiritual life. Whatever Srila Prabhupada said, he would just follow it on it immediately. And about his early journey to Krishna consciousness, he came to Krishna consciousness during Srila Prabhupada's presence, and he was inspired by Prabhupada's message, purity, and compassion. And as we had discussed this, that he had prepared to dedicate his life to Srila Prabhupada's instruction. About meeting Srila Prabhupada, he had met in the very early days, and he was attracted by the practical and transformative teachings of Krishna consciousness. For example, as we saw that how he was stating that Prabhupada used to deal with interfaith other religions members. So he was in one of the lectures he shares that he was very much drawn by those qualities of Srila Prabhupada, like everyone is invited to Krishna consciousness, and there is no such restriction or foundation that you can't be a part of this mission. And thus, he had dedicated his life under Srila Prabhupada's guidance. And his initiation name was Nand Kumar Prabhu. And his main, we know that every Srila Prabhupada disciple has a very unique concept of serving. So, as we know, like in the lecture, he was talking about initially he had a very good background of being a healthy person, physical, like mainly focusing on absorbing direct things from nature, for example, raw foods and etc. So, in one of the lectures, he shares that he was very much inclined even in the mission of Krishna consciousness, so that the devotees could have the same mindset of absorbing natural things. But as we heard the past time about the honey and the sugar, which he made, the halwa he made for Srila Prabhupada. So then he came into the conclusion that whatever Srila Prabhupada says, I am into it. About the personal service to Srila Prabhupada, as we just discussed, he served as Prabhupada's cook and personal servant for a significant period. He prepared meals with devotion and attentiveness, accompanied Prabhupada during travels. He witnessed many intimate moments of Prabhupada's daily life and teachings, and this seva became a defining part of his spiritual journey. And experiences and contribution, he had learned the first hand the mode of personal service, absorbed many instructions directly from Srila Prabhupada, contributed to temple activities, outreach, and kirtan, remembered for his heartfelt devotion and gentle personality. Even the post years after the disappearance of Srila Prabhupada, after the years 1977, he was firmly fixed in like the teachings of Srila Prabhupada, and especially maintaining the unbroken Guru Parampara consciousness. And he is known amongst the devotees for his conservative and principled stance on spiritual standards. About his devotional qualities, he is simple, humble and affectionate, deeply faithful to Srila Prabhupada, known for soft-heartedness and sincerity, exemplifies the mode of selfless service. From the years 1980s to 1990s, he lived relatively, you know, actually he was not very much known in the institution because he used to live in foreign, and he's known for his personal discussions, remembrance of Srila Prabhupada, and he's one of the very senior devotees whom devotees seek shelter for guidance. And about the legacy, a treasured is early disciple whose service forms part of ISKCON's foundation. His personal recollections keep Prabhupada's presence alive for new generation. As we know, like for the last 30 minutes, it didn't at all feel like it was 30 minutes ongoing, because the pastimes which he was sharing was like, it was literally a visual experience of how it must have been with Srila Prabhupada. His life stands as a reminder of intimate service to Guru, an inspiration for devotees worldwide to serve with love and dedication. So we have such amazing devotees with us whom we have been hearing from for the last few, uh, actually it's about a year we have been hearing about Srila Prabhupada disciple. So thank you very much for attending so carefully. Much, would you like to add something to this?
No, I don't know so much about him. She nicely explained. And thank you very much. You are taking so much uh, responsibility for continuing this program. I normally forget this class. Somewhere I remember that, oh, class is going on by seeing the message. At least I'm not understanding that it is important for me to attend this class. Please continue. I'll try to regulate my life house, at least to hear this class.
Thank you very much, Maharaj, for inspiring us to continue this. Jai His Grace Nand Kumar Prabhu ki jai. Bhakti Prema Swami Maharaj ki jai. Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Nitai Gaur Premanande.